All right, guys, we'll wait another just 30 seconds or a minute or so. We had a really good turnout on the RSVPs. So we've got a few more folks that'll probably join us here in a few moments. We'll give them just another minute or so. Hopefully you guys can see the computer screen there, which will help facilitate the talk tonight. If you can't, no big deal. We'll go slow, and we'll give you guys a chance to at the end to ask questions. So please definitely, as we go, write down any questions you may have, and we'll definitely have time for that at the end. So I'll go ahead and remind you guys, feel free during the presentation part, starting now through the presentation, if you wish, go ahead and turn your cameras off and stay on mute. And that way you guys can kind of be relaxed and sit back and kind of listen along. And then when we get to the Q&A, feel free to turn your cameras back on and you're unmute, and feel free to ask questions at that point. So we'll give everybody just about another 30 seconds or so, and we'll get started. All right, guys. Well, officially welcome. Thank you all very, very much for joining in tonight. Let me get everybody to double check your sound if you have not already. It looks like everybody's on mute, so it looks good. Thank you for that. But gosh, we appreciate you all joining us. A lot of you on with us tonight have been on with us in the past sessions of these, and we have yet again another very, very special friend and subject matter expert, the pro himself, Steve Ward, who I'll introduce here in just a few moments. But we're excited to have you guys, and thank you for being part of this ministry activity, which is something that's very important and a big, big part of what we do. And you can see the screen here. As you can see, we will have time at the end for Q&A. There's an email address on the bottom of the screen. It'll also be at the bottom of all the screens as we go through this. So as you have questions, if you want to write down those questions, you can use the chat feature of Zoom if you're familiar with that, or if you wish to just email that email address, we'll help to facilitate that and be able to provide those questions to Steve at the end, who has been generous enough with his time to stay on at the end and take questions. So again, feel free to use the chat feature if you wish, or drop us your email questions, through the email address you see on the screen. This is what we call Learn from a Pro. We do this once a quarter, and Leslie and I both. For those we don't know, by the way, I'm Todd. This is Leslie, and we're coming to you as a team here as part of Step by Step Ministry, and we really pray and try to keep our eyes open for who God is bringing to us as a ministry partner with Step by Step Ministry. And as I mentioned, we'll introduce our special guest here in just a few moments, Steve Ward, who God really got creative in how he connected us and how our ministries align. I can't wait to tell you more about that. So before we go any further, we're going to start tonight in prayer. And Leslie has volunteered to lead us in that. So if you would join us in prayer as we get started.
Father God, we just come to you right now. We thank you for who you are, for the fact that you love us unconditionally and that you are sovereign over our lives. Thank you that in your sovereignty, you ordained this message tonight that's coming from Steve, Lord. We pray that you speak through him. We pray that you would open up our hearts and our minds to the message that he's going to bring to us, that we know will ultimately bring us freedom. So we welcome you and your spirit into this place, and we thank you ahead of time of what you're going to do. And Father, just thank you for this group and everybody who's made an effort to be here tonight. Meet us where we are. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. All right, guys. So as we get started here, we're going to go ahead and click to the next slide. I'm going to take about 3 minutes, and I promise I'm not going to take too much of Steve's time, but I know there are quite a few folks on this session with us tonight that have not been on one of these before. So I want to take just a couple of quick minutes and assume that some of you may be asking the question, all right, Step by Step Ministry, what is this? And what do we do? And why do we exist? I want to just kind of hit on this just for a quick second. I've got on the screen here, this is just a screenshot. I didn't want to click over to our live webpage and mess up the screen share here, but I took a snapshot of our homepage. And so when you think of step-by-step ministry, I want you to think of what you see right there at the top. And it's our tagline. It's what we say at the top of our website. Life is hard and we think we can help. For more than 19 years, we've been helping people just like you learn and apply healthier habits for life. And when you get on down into the webpage, you see there at the bottom, it says you, it says God, and it says others. I'm going to click over to the next slide, and this will give you a little bit better overview of exactly what we do. So when we say life is hard, we can help. I want to stop and camp out on that thought right there for a second. And I just want to say, over the last few months, God has really been working through Leslie. And Leslie has taken an incredible leadership role with this ministry and has added vision to this ministry that we have not had before. Those of you that have been on previous calls, you know a lot of our history and where we've come from, and we're thankful for every one of those steps and every one of those steps that has gotten us to this point. But in the last 30 to 60 days, what Leslie has done to verbalize and to really formalize kind of in writing, I want to show you this. This is how God is speaking to us, and I think He's using her right now in a really mighty way. Here's the first thing, and this is how Leslie began to formulate it for our ministry. We call step one, discover how God uniquely and perfectly designed you. So when you think about life is hard, we can help, you're going to see from us basically 3 buckets. And within each of those buckets, you're going to see what we call modules or resources. And we keep it really, really simple, so you know exactly kind of where to go based on what you need. And we believe step one is ourselves, working on yourself. The scripture verse there from Psalm 139 says, "For you formed my inward parts. You knitted me together in my mother's womb. I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works. My soul knows it very well." And underneath that, we have put together 3 modules. This is not anything we wrote or invented. In fact, these are books and resources that have impacted us and that we encourage you guys to dive into. Discover Yourself is a behavioral assessment that reveals how God designed you, which we offer. We lead you through a discovery of your spiritual gifts. That's another module. And we also can walk you through a personal inventory. And through that personal inventory, it helps us to reveal idols in our lives. This is what we call step one. This is the part that's about ourselves. But then as we step into part 2, we see invest in your relationship with God. So now we go beyond ourselves and into our relationship with God. Jeremiah 9, "Thus says the Lord, let not the wise man boast in his wisdom. Let not the mighty man boast in his might. Let not the rich man boast in his riches. But let him who boasts boast in this, that he understands and knows me, that I am the Lord who practices steadfast love, justice, and righteousness in the earth. For in these things I delight, declares the Lord." We offer monthly devotionals, monthly fellowship and prayer gatherings, which is what you're on here tonight. That's exactly what this is, one of our quarterly fellowship gatherings. We have recommended reading and video links. And those are the things we offer within that second bucket, helping you connect more and growing a relationship with God. And then our third bucket is improving relationships with others. The verse here is from Philippians 2, "Do nothing from rivalry or conceit, but in humility count others more significant than yourselves. Let each of you look not only to his own interests, but also to the interests of others." Right now, we have 2 modules in this bucket. Leslie is currently leading folks through, and anyone that registers going forward through a module that's based on the 5 love languages, as well as the Boundaries book. We have several folks on the call with us tonight that are currently working through the Boundaries book with Leslie and myself. We call that Know Your Limits. So this is the picture of the ministry. If you thought about what do these guys do? I hear Todd and Leslie talking about step-by-step ministry. What is it? Here's the picture. Life is hard, we can help. And we believe we can help in these 3 ways. So hopefully that's a good overview and help you kind of develop a picture a little bit more about who we are and what we do. A couple of housekeeping reminders, as we said already, please remain on mute and feel free to keep your cameras off. Looks like most of you've got that figured out already. Thank you very much. We already mentioned the email address. We'll keep that on the bottom of the screen here if you want to send your questions to us that way. And without any further ado, I'd like to take a moment and introduce our special guest for the session tonight. Steve, I've got your bio here. Give me a minute. I want to make sure you get your proper introduction.
Hey, don't worry about it.
Well, it's impressive, and I'm thankful for how God led us together. In fact, I probably should start with that. Step by Step Ministry participated in a community event back in early May. It was with Birmingham Christian Fellowship Magazine. There was a gathering, I think it was May 8th, if I remember right, of vendors and exhibitors that all came together. And that morning, as we were setting up the Step by Step golf booth, we happened to see a gentleman walk by. I think, Steve, you saw our booth as well. And Steve's ministry is called Steps, as you guys see on the screen there. So Steve and I immediately kind of made eye contact and connected. And I can tell you this, I was touched very quickly by Steve's message. Leslie and I followed up with Steve a few days later, or a week or so later, and had an opportunity to hear Steve take kind of an overview kind of his message and what his ministry is all about. And we just immediately said, we have a place to connect and a way to connect. And Steve, we thought immediately about having you, be a part of this session. And I cannot wait for your message tonight and the impact and the way that God may speak to the group here tonight. Folks, let me tell you a little bit about Steve. He is the founder and executive director of Steps Ministry. It's a nonprofit ministry with goals of helping people improve their lives, grow closer to God, and prevent addiction. He is a writer, speaker, teacher, consultant, and coach in the areas of personal effectiveness, emotional well-being, spiritual growth, and the prevention of addiction and relapse. Steve and his family battled significant addiction issues of their own, which Steve is going to tell us about tonight. Coming out of those trials, Steve spent thousands of hours studying and writing about how to pursue a healthy, integrated lifestyle that would lessen the risk of addiction. He's an author of a book called Steps, A Daily Journey to a Better Life. He publishes a blog. He graduated from Georgia Tech with a degree in industrial engineering. He worked for IBM for 38 years in a number of cities in management and leadership positions in engineering, sales, business transformation, and global marketing. And today, he is taking his personal experiences and delivering those through his Steps ministry. And it is our privilege, Steve, to have you join us tonight. I will turn it over to you. Thank you very, very much for being here.
Thank you. One of the best things that ever happened to me was being an alcoholic. Because I didn't know it, but I had a lot of other addictions going on as well. I was addicted to work. I was working probably 70 hours a week. I was a perfectionist. I was addicted to control. I'd been trained in control and trained even more at it at IBM. I was also addicted to self-image. But, so alcohol was part of the issue, but I was a highly functioning alcoholic, right? So it wasn't wrecking my life, and I was still doing very well at work and in other parts of life. And I would have continued to do, I think, well at IBM. But alcohol led me to figure out all those other addictions. And when I say that I'm thankful that I was an alcoholic, because I wouldn't have figured those other things out otherwise if I hadn't gotten into recovery. And I might have done well at work, but I'd probably been divorced, unhappy, and had a heart attack when I was 55. So at the time, I didn't know what I didn't know. And getting into recovery woke me up, to be perfectly frank, and taught me what life is all about. And it helped me with a lot of things. I also learned that for me and for everybody, right, that it's okay not to be okay. That, I'm not broken. Everybody has issues. We all do. And I'm not alone, but that we can get better one step at a time. All of us can. And I learned, in addition to dealing with our substance or behavior of choice, that we can find more peace, joy, and purpose in life. I learned how to be a better husband and a better dad and a better boss and a better worker and a better friend. And a lot of that came out of recovery. And then as many people who go through that world of recovery figure out, I found what became my life calling, to help other hurting people learn how they can make life better one step at a time as well. So like I said, frankly, being an alcoholic worked out pretty good for me. And I actually feel blessed that God used those trials to do some wonderful things. So I'll tell you a little bit about that journey. And yes, there is some drama and some tough times that occurred. But along the way, I'll highlight 5 points, I think, which I'll call them an epiphany, right? They didn't all necessarily happen at one precise moment in time, but they were 5 key points for me where I learned something important to life. And I think these lessons apply to most people. So even though your circumstances will be totally different from what mine were, I think you'll see yourself in here somewhere, maybe in multiple places. So I'd suggest be on the lookout for where do you fit? Where did, either some lesson I learned or some mistake I made, where does that apply to you and what can you learn from it? It started out, I was a kid in the 60s, and I was born into a typical family of the 60s. Mom and dad were great, 3 kids, no trauma growing up. Between me and my brother and sister, we took 3 different routes through the teenage years, and 3 different routes as it related to substances. One of the 3 kids, never really got into alcohol or drugs at all. It just wasn't a part of their life. One of the other ones experimented and drank in high school and kind of did the teenage thing, as a lot of teenagers do, but then grew out of it in their 20s and went on to go about their merry way. The third one started drinking in high school and then went on to do it for 30 years. And as you can guess, that was me. And I became the alcoholic. And it's interesting to think about that. Why did one of those 3 kids who came from the same family, the same upbringing, the same genes, go that way and make those choices? And one of the things I think you'll learn about when you study addiction and recovery is people do what they do for a reason. Right? We're either trying to deal with the pain we have or solve a problem that we have or achieve some need. We do what we do for a reason, and we do what we do to feel a certain way, whether we know it or not. And when I was in high school, I was pretty comfortable in one identity. I was valedictorian of my high school. I was president of the Honor Society. So in that world, I was very comfortable and confident. But that's not the world I wanted to travel in, right? I wanted to hang around, with the cool crowd. I wanted to be cool. I wanted to be connected. I wanted to be carefree. And I was actually on a church trip when I was a sophomore when I had my first beer. And I can remember that sensation, that it made me feel the way I wanted to feel. I was hanging out with some kids from another high school, and I thought again, hey, they're the cool crowd. And it made me feel connected. It made me feel cool. It made me feel carefree. And that one sensation for you or for people is a point in time when their life can change. When they take a substance or do a behavior or something like that, and looking back, they say, it made me feel the way I wanted to feel. So I went on to Georgia Tech, and I'm not quite sure when I became an alcoholic. Probably in those years, because I got pretty darn good at it. And I was able to maintain dean's list at high schools, at Tech, but I was a highly functioning alcoholic by then, because I was, probably drinking 6.5 nights a week in some of the days and going to class only when I had to. And I got out, as Todd said, I graduated with a degree in industrial engineering. I started with IBM in Tucson, Arizona. And over my 20s, I really think a lot kind of about some of the stories in Ecclesiastes, if you're familiar with them, where, the author there was exploring various lifestyles. And I think that's what I was doing in my 20s. I wasn't exactly aware of it, but in retrospect, it's as clear as day. I was exploring, I started exploring, the lifestyle of being competent at my work, right? That's a very good road to go down. And I said, by me being the very best I can be, that will be my identity. And then I tried kind of the related field of recognition. If I'm seen as the best and recognized as the best, that will be my identity. Or advancement, that will be my identity. Along the way, I'm also experimenting with things like, well, maybe it's thrill seeking. Maybe if I do the most dangerous or exciting things, that will be my identity. Or maybe in my case, it's partying, or it's girls, or it's fun. So all of those things were part of my lifestyle in my 20s. I'd been in engineering for about three and a half years, and I made a pretty significant career change for incredibly immature reasons. I thought at the time, that being in sales in my company in IBM, I saw those as the cool kids, you know, in terms of the echelon, the cool echelon in my company. And I said, well, I can be one of the cool kids and I can make more money, so I'm going to move into sales, even though I'm wired as an introvert. You know, so I did that, and I actually was in sales for a long time. But in exploring all these things, you know, I never really found that what we all seek underneath, right? Those feelings of meaning and purpose. You know, and as I got into my late 20s, you know, life starts catching up with you a little while, right? All of a sudden, you know, you're at work with people who are more experienced, who are more skilled. You know, you're not the smartest person in the room anymore. You know, and you know, so all of a sudden now you got the stress of trying to keep up, you know, this image that you've been trying to set for a while. You know, alcohol starts to create more problems. You know, most addictions are a progressive disease, and they will start to create problems that show up increasingly. So somewhere in my mid 20s, I made a bad mistake and went to visit a friend of mine in San Francisco, and we went out partying that night in town. And then I decided, well, I'm perfectly okay to drive back to my hotel down in San Jose, you know, which if you've ever been in the Bay Area, it's about an hour drive. Well, that was a mistake. So I got a DUI. I was lucky that I didn't run into anybody. And when I look back at that instance, that was a long time ago, right? But I still feel a sense of shame about it. But you know, it's not really because I drank a lot of alcohol that night. I did that a lot of nights. It's not, I hate to say it, it's not that I did the horribly dangerous thing to get in a car, which unfortunately I did way too many times. It's the fact that I was in such denial at that point that I took the case to court. And I thought I could convince a jury that I was not guilty. Well, that was idiotic. You know, I was absolutely guilty, but you know, I was in a frame of mind where I thought, well, I can convince these people that I'm fine, which didn't work out, as you can guess. So, you know, so that was kind of what I was searching for through my 20s. And then when I got moved toward 30, you know, slowly I bumped into the first thing which led me to the first epiphany in my life. And it was a gorgeous girl named Catherine. And, you know, again, when I first saw her, I just thought she was hot, right? So I thought kind of I wanted to date her from an ego standpoint. So we started dating and she became my best friend. And somewhere along that relationship, it had occurred to me that, you know, for the first 30 years of my life, it had all been about me. And to all of a sudden realize that it doesn't have to be about me, that I can actually have unconditional love for someone else was kind of a breakthrough for me. And we got married. We had our first son who came into the world kicking and screaming and had the umbilical cord wrapped around his neck and came into so he came into the world fighting. And actually that was foreshadowing for his teenage years, which you'll hear about in a moment. You know, but with him, I wondered, you know, can I love a son as much as I love my wife? And it turns out that I could. That was pretty cool. And then our second son came along, and I'm saying the same thing, but I can distinctly remember, you know, right after we brought our second son home, thinking, you know, I don't know if I can love him as much as I love Carter. It's just because he was the second. He was only a few hours old, but that worked out as well. In other words, God somehow multiplies or expands our love, and so that really led to what was an epiphany in my life, and I call it the Epiphany of Community. That we are built for relationship. We are built to be around other people, even if you happen to be an introvert, as I am. And we're just, somehow we get a sense from that. And for me to figure out that life wasn't all about me was a major breakthrough. It really was. So then I'm moving into, you know, my 30s and 40s, but I still haven't thought much about some of the other big questions, like what's the meaning of life and all that. And I got into my late 30s and, you know, I was thinking about these things. You know, I'm kind of wired to think about stuff like that. And I started thinking, you know, if you're gonna think about meaning, you have to take into account this, this variable called God. Is there really a God? And if so, what is he like? And how can we learn about him, and how can we learn about himself? So I started reading lots of books about it. And I became intellectually convinced that actually that there was no doubt about it. There was a God, and that it happened to be the God in the Bible, and frankly, that Jesus was exactly who he said he was, and that he came to earth. So intellectually, I was absolutely convinced of this, but my heart wasn't. And I was kind of going about, my daily business. But I kept saying to my wife, I said, honey, all this stuff is true. Doesn't this change everything? And she said, well, yeah, I guess it does. So we moved from Atlanta to Orlando. We moved around a fair amount. And we moved to Orlando and, thought we were going to go to one church, and kept driving by another church, and wound up going through the doors of that one, and met some great people who led us along the way. And then all of a sudden, one night, I found myself in Jacksonville Jaguar Stadium, walking into, of all things, a Promise Keepers event. And I walked into that, and it was as clear as day. I could see the milestones of my life that had been laid out for me, and that had led me to that point in time. And so I discovered what meaning is all about. That God is good, and that he loves me just as he loves you, and that he's there to guide us along the way. And all of a sudden, the word meaning took on a whole new aspect for me. It was awesome, and it did change everything. But still, I thought, well, that's great. So that was the second epiphany. The first one really was the epiphany of community, and this one was of meaning. But where do I fit in all this? What's my purpose? And so I said, well, I guess I'm supposed to be doing good things now. So I started trying to figure out good things, but it was a little bit more out of a matter of duty, perhaps, than out of calling. And then I had lunch with a friend of mine one time, and he was a friend who ran an inner city ministry called Frontline Outreach. And I went to meet him just because, I was in, one of those typical suburban churches, and we were looking for one of those service projects where we could go skating in on a Saturday afternoon and spend 2 or 3 hours and act like we're doing somebody a lot of good, and then kind of go back to the suburbs and do our thing, But this friend who ran an African-American ministry in an inner city, it's a pretty tough part of town. And this was like late October, getting into November. He started describing this huge Christmas event that he had a vision for, said, Steve, we had to invite like 600 people and just have lots of entertainment, and have a couple hundred volunteers, and greet them at the table, and have childcare for their kids, and feed them wonderful food, and, have somebody preach to them. And then afterwards, give presents to the kids, not just one present, but a bountiful array of presents. And he went on and on and on and on. And, the project manager in my head had turned him off, a third of the way into that conversation, because I thought, well, that's an interesting idea, but, you would have to be planning this now to get ready for next year, much less, 5 or 6 weeks from now. So I left and somehow escaped. And the next day, I had an up and back trip to New York. I used to go to New York a lot. And so the next afternoon, I'm sitting on the airplane at the tarmac of LaGuardia Airport. So this is less than 24 hours after that. Oh, by the way, let me close that conversation. So before I left that guy, he said, Steve, to get people to come to this event, we need to have a big name speaker so that they'll come in the doors and see us. He says, I think we need to have Julius Erving, Dr. J, come speak. And I thought he was crazy before, but I knew he was crazy now, right? How are you going to get, what in effect was the Michael Jordan of my younger years, to come to a local event at inner city ministry. So next day I go to New York. I'm sitting on the airplane, and right before the doors close, a gentleman gets on, and he sits in the seat next to me. It was Dr. J. And it became intuitively obvious that I was supposed to do something at that point in time. So I talked to Mr. Irving for 2 hours, and I said, Mr. Irving, I think we're supposed to do a service project together if you're willing. And he said that he was. And 6 weeks later, 8 churches, including 7 inner city churches, and 200 volunteers had raised $40,000, and 600 people walked in the room, and 46 of them signed a card saying they accepted Jesus Christ as their Savior for the very first time. And we gave thousands of dollars of presents to the parents for them to give to their kids and maintain their dignity. And we went on to hold that event for the next 7 years. So the Epiphany of Purpose, right, is that we are all called to do something. And as far as I can tell, I'm called to try to help hurting people feel better. And finding that epiphany of purpose is very important for all of us. And we find it in different ways. For you, it could be helping the people you know at work or your family, or it could be working as, serving meals in an inner city ministry. It could be lots of things. It doesn't have to be something grandiose. It can be anything. So that was the epiphany of purpose. But I was still drinking. And so was my wife, who in effect was my drinking buddy. And as our older son got into middle school and high school, we had moved back from Orlando to Atlanta again. And he made some choices that he wanted to hang with the cool crowd. And he made it, and that started us on about an 11 or 12 year journey that got very dark at times. He was in residential recovery twice, once for a year. And there were times along the way when we thought we might lose him. But, God does what he does for a reason. And along the way, my wife had significant issues with depression. And she had used alcohol for a while to make herself feel better because, like I said, she and I were drinking buddies for years, and therefore we lived in mutual denial with it. My situation was, even though, I was still doing well at work and I wasn't robbing banks or having wrecks or anything, I just had this growing sense of shame, that I'd wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning and feel this burning like, Steve, what are you doing? Is this what your life is supposed to be? Are you going to get old and look back and think that you cruised through life at 2/3 speed just so you could have a good buzz? And is that going to be your legacy? And that scared me to death, so I decided that could not be my legacy. And I got introduced to the world of recovery. And that's where I learned some of those things I said earlier, right? That, it's okay not to be okay sometimes. And we're not broken. And we all have issues. We really do. But we can get better. And we're not alone. And there's people that can help. So that was the fourth, epiphany of identity. And recovery, my recovery program, of course, was something called Celebrate Recovery, which I loved. But the more I got into it, I was absolutely amazed. I saw that one is not only one of the world's worst problems, which is addiction and substance abuse, it's very, very treatable. There are tens of millions of people who've gotten better. They just don't go around talking about it, right? So most people don't know. The other is that what you learn in recovery is a lifestyle that helps people live well emotionally, personally, and spiritually. That's what it is. You go to any AA meeting or Celebrate Recovery meeting, there's one in Mountain Brook where you can go in there on a Saturday morning, there's 110 people there, and there's C-level executives and attorneys and doctors and lots of people there. And if you ask any of them, well, you haven't been drinking, Bob, for 20 years. Why are you still coming? He says, this is just what life is all about. So I saw all that. And the question that put me on the track that I am now is, I thought, why do we wait until people crash and burn and then send them through 2 years of recovery? That makes no sense. Why don't we teach this to everybody? And why don't we do it earlier in the ballgame? Why don't parents raise their kids this way? Why don't we teach it to high schoolers and kids in college? Why don't companies include this in their professional development programs? It makes no sense. You look at a wellness program and it has massive gaps in it, on how do you live with real resilience to prevent emotional issues from taking us down, and how do you live with intentionality and self-awareness? Those things just don't show up in programs. So what we talk about now is, how do we help people deal with real life? So I went to go try to find, a lot of books to read about how do you take the principles of recovery for real life, and I didn't find a lot. So I wrote one, and I didn't really know I was supposed to be a writer till it just turned out I had something to say. But I enjoyed writing, and so I started blogging, and then that put me on a path where I felt led eventually 3 years ago to leave IBM and to found Steps Ministries. So as Todd said, we help people improve their lives, grow closer to God, and prevent addiction. And the good news is you can do all those things at the same exact time. So that's kind of the preamble. What I hope that you learned is that we all have our own journey, and along the way, we can bump into epiphanies if we keep our eyes open. And they may take the form of those 5 that I mentioned, meaning, purpose, identity, contribution, community. They may happen in a different way for you, but life does have great meaning for you if you find it. And we can learn life lessons. And whether you have significant issues or not, there are things that you can do so life can be better, I promise. So I'm now going to switch modes a little bit and share some charts with you and kind of shift away from my story into more what are some of the things that we do at Steps to help people live life better? It sounds like, as Todd explained, that a lot of our ministries somewhat line up. So it's just a matter of fact that, this is a quote y'all probably recognize by Henry David Thoreau, right? That the mass of men and women lead lives of quiet desperation. Well, he said that, I think, in 1864, but it's as true today as it was then. About 1 out of 3 people have significant issues with stress these days. And 80% will say that they have stress on a common basis. About 1 in 10 have severe depression issues. I don't know about you or what age you are, but, I know lots of people who, are on medication for anxiety or depression. And by the way, you only know those that let you know, right? It just seems to be normal these days. If you look at work engagement and you look at studies by Gallup, about 54% of people are not engaged at work. And guess what? That's not even the worst part. 14% are seriously not engaged, meaning they're negatively engaged at work. That's just what the workplace is like. We all have insecurities. We all have discouragements. But guess what we do? We put on a good face. And when people say, "How are you doing?" we say, "Fine," especially at church and especially at work. We're not about to let anybody see that we have any issues going on, which is the exact wrong thing that we should be doing. So, sometimes those problems get worse. But like I said, that's why I led you through that story of the 5 epiphanies, right? That, if we find a sense of meaning, then that doesn't mean we have to be hopeless. If we have a sense of identity that can take away any shame that we feel, community helps us to be connected and not feel lonely, and on, right? If we look for those bigger things, it helps us to deal with life. But there's lots of other tools that we can use to deal with life as well. Rather than just talk about addictions, I normally use this acronym CHAINS. I think I love acronyms, for some reason. So CHAINS stands for compulsive habits, addictions and idols, and negative self-talk. And frankly, we all have them. We all have issues that we deal with, and they hold us prisoner. They keep us from the peace, joy, and purpose that we are designed to have. They really do. They control what we do, and we find it hard to escape. This is what I think a very common sense definition of addiction. That addiction is when we keep doing something over and over again, even though it has negative consequences, and we find it hard to stop. You may or may not know that addiction strikes more people than cancer, diabetes, and heart disease, and it kills more people than vehicular accidents, murders, and suicides. That's just what we're dealing with. This is how it happens. That real life occurs, and we either get stressed or sad, or we don't have as much fun as we think we should. And addiction is really a thinking disease. It's a disease of the brain. And in recovery, they use that term called stinking thinking, but it's kind of descriptive. Everything kind of starts with how we think. And those repetitive thoughts pretty soon become patterns of self-talk. You talk to yourself. You may or may not notice it, but start to pay attention. You have a little voice that's talking to you all the time. And very often, you probably have a little voice that's extremely negative and that knows you very well. My little voice that comes in occasionally, it's probably been with me since I was about in 4th grade. And even though, like I said, I was smart in school and actually I was pretty athletic, my little voice says, "Steve, you're fooling everybody. You're not really that smart. That's stupid. You're tricking everybody." It's something like that. You probably have a voice. And so we all have these cycles of negative self-talk. As we repeat those, they turn into behaviors. And when we do them over and over again, they become compulsive, and then they grow up into be addictions and idols. And at that point, we're a crash waiting to happen, right? Only luck and God's grace are keeping us from our life coming apart at that point. These are three statistics you need to know. The U.S. Surgeon General says that 1 in 7 people will have a substance abuse problem over the course of their lifetime. 1 in 7. And 1 in 3 families will have it going on. And 90% of those people will not get help. That means there's a lot of people that you know that need help. And when you think about it from a concept of change, right? We all know people who have changed, right? And you probably know a few, but that is the tip of the iceberg of what's really going on around you. You know, if you look at this, you know, there are 80 million people who either smoke cigarettes or deal with substances. You know, there's another 56 million who have stress or depression. That's just the nature of the beast. And the people you know are the iceberg. But by you being more aware and more empathetic, there are things you can do to help. And you don't have to be an addiction counselor. You just have to be available. When you expand it even further, we all have chains. And when you look at this chart, the big difference is, right, these aren't substances listed on the bottom here. These are behaviors, right? You can be addicted to a behavior just as much as a substance. And when you are addicted to spending money or gambling or pornography or something like that, guess what? You're rewiring the brain as much as you are as if you're taking a methamphetamine. It can be, you know, proven in brain scans. Neuroplasticity is your biggest enemy and it's your best friend, right? That when you do something repeatedly, you are training and literally rewiring your brain. So that's what's going on around us. And we all have things that we deal with. So we talk about how you can break your chains. And I'm real quickly going to introduce you to these 3 areas: awareness, connection, and education. The charts we're going to flash through are going to have about 1 thought each. They are going to be simple, but I promise you that they're profound. You know, we have read hundreds of books and studied the best experts and tried to simplify it all for you. So some of the things that seem familiar or that seem simple are actually those that are most profound. And if you know someone, just remember ACE, ACE, right? If you help them become aware of their issues, if they talk to somebody, and if they get into some education, you have just potentially saved their life and certainly helped them get better. Awareness is that self-awareness is the beginning of transformation. You know, Socrates said that an unexamined life is not worth living. And a lot of people live, you know, in absolute life of, you know, lack of awareness whatsoever. It's amazing. And we all have blind spots, right? My blind spot was communication, right? I tended to speak to people in a way that was abrupt and even critical because I was a perfectionist, or if you know the Enneagram, right? I was a perfectionist. I was number 1 in Enneagram, right? So I put those standards on everybody else. That was a blind spot for me. I didn't have self-awareness in that area, and we all have those, and you do as well. So self-awareness is the beginning of transformation. And part of that is learning to be intentional and thoughtful in our choices. And most people don't think about it, but doing nothing is a decision. Now, if you make the choice to do nothing on purpose, that's okay. Sometimes, you know, that's the right choice, but most times we do it by default. We're either too busy or overworked or distracted or numb or, you know, staring at our cell phone or drinking or something, and we do nothing out of default. So you need to remember that. But you need to know that your life is the sum of your choices, right? In many ways, your life is the sum of your choices. And insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. So be intentional and thoughtful about your choices. The second part of awareness is understand what you do and don't control. This is one of the things that's a breakthrough in recovery. And I talk to business people all the time. They're astounded by this, right? That we really don't control outcomes, and we really don't control other people, even though we think we do. And we don't control many of the circumstances around us. We spend most of our life carrying this incredible burden that we can control all those things, and we don't. You know, we can control the choice of our values. We can control the choices we make every day. But once you understand what you do and don't control, it changes your life. And you may know the Serenity Prayer. It's a great tool. I use it all the time. I say, you know, God, give me the serenity to, you know, to not to change the things I can't control. I'm wired to control things, right? So I have to seek that serenity. Sometimes I need the courage to change the things I can. And mostly I need the wisdom to know the difference. So be aware of what you do and you don't control. The second area was connection. If you know somebody that's hurting, I promise, they're not going to, on their own, probably be talking to anybody. But that's exactly what they need to do. And that first conversation that a hurting person has with someone may be the key that changes the trajectory of their life. So if you're around someone like that, by you being available and listening and not trying to fix them, not trying to enable them, just listen. You could be the person that is the key to that change. But if it's you, talk to someone. I urge you to do it. And just find someone who's aware and empathetic and willing to listen. And again, if you're that person, and if someone ever, gives you a little hint that they're hurting, say they're, well, guess what? Thanks for asking. I actually do have some issues at home, or, my marriage isn't doing that great, or, I'm starting to think that I'm drinking too much. Do you know what most people do when they hear that? They walk away. They make some excuse like, oh, I'm sorry. Or if they're standing outside the church, they say, okay, well, Fred, I'll pray for you. And they walk away. You need to walk toward someone who says something like that. Because again, that may be a very pivotal person. So connection is very important for breaking chains. And we need to invest in relationships, right? The best investments involve some risk, and so do relationships. And really that means being vulnerable. If you read authors like, Brene Brown, who talk about vulnerability being the heart of courage, it's really the new era of courage, especially for men. Women are a lot better at being vulnerable and transparent than men are by nature. It's really the new frontier for courage, I think, for men is to learn to be vulnerable. And I love many things about recovery, but one I do is the people you meet. I can go into a recovery meeting and sit next to someone I haven't met, and in 5 minutes be having a more in-depth, personal, real conversation with them than a lot of people that I've known for 20 years. It's great. The other aspect of that connection is check out recovery. Doing it yourself might work, but it might not. You're about to see a lot of resources that can help you, but I really suggest that you check out recovery. There's a lot of different types. If you need help understanding them, give me a call. I'll be glad to walk it through. There's different types of recoveries. There's going to meetings. I'm a big believer in 12-step meetings. There's intensive outpatient. There's residential. There's using a therapist. Again, you're about to see a lot of resources that can help you, but I suggest you check out recovery. Finally, on education, one of the things I said, a lot of simple things are so profound. If you study what neuroscientists and psychologists and behavioral scientists and people in recovery and others say is one of the best ways to transform your life, they'll say by taking small steps. Really, it's that simple. So use that to change your life and overcome the inertia of inactivity by just taking that first action and then take the next one at a time. And part of education is learning how to cope. These 3 little words on the bottom. Again, if you go read 10 books on stress management or 5 books on mind management, thought management, guess what they're going to boil down to? 3 steps that are very much like this. Pause, evaluate, choose. If you're stressed out, pause, step back, step out of the situation, just breathe for a minute. Think about what's going on and just separate yourself from it for a minute. Evaluate. What's really going on? Why do you feel the way you feel? What's the root cause? Try to let go of those feelings and then consciously make a choice. And the choice may be to walk away or maybe to not choose, but pause, evaluate, choose. Very simple, but very, very useful. And finally, we have a lot of tools that are available for you in the toolkit for real life, and you can find it at lifeimprovementsteps.com. So just remember that. Right now, frankly, they're all free resources. There are hundreds of articles and videos and podcasts that help you solve, many of the things that we're alluding to now. So the next step is just bookmark that step, lifeimprovementsteps.com. I hope you'll sign up for the blog. Once a week, you'll just get, a newsletter that talks about how do you live life better in one of these areas. You can use any of the resources that are there. I do have one favor to ask. I would really appreciate if you could send me an email and let me know what you thought of this presentation. We're trying to find ways to help the most people, and you can help us in that ministry. You can help other people by doing that. This presentation is the first time I've given it in this form, so I would appreciate that. If you just said, in these 3 areas, from 1 low or 10 high, was it clear? Was it valuable? And was it encouraging? Just in those 3 areas, rate it from 1 to 10, and then tell me, what did you like? What could we do better? And what ideas that you have? So again, Steve Ward at lifeimprovementsteps.com. That would really mean a lot. So as we wrap up, and by the way, we'll have time for a little Q&A. You really, if you're hurting or someone is hurting, It really is okay not to be okay. You're not broken. Everybody has issues. They just hide it very well, and you're not alone. And there are steps that you can take to feel better. You know, we all have chains. We all have habits and addictions and idols and negative self-talk that drives us. But, you know, if we just pause to get aware and get connected to other people and get educated on what we can do, we can get better. And we can find, just by thinking about these big values, we can find meaning and purpose. We can find identity and contribution, and we can find community. And life can be better if we just keep focusing on taking the next right steps. Thank you. So with that, if there are any questions, or Todd or Leslie, if y'all have any questions, I'll be glad to talk to them.
Awesome. Steve, thank you very much. If you don't mind, stop sharing your screen, and then we'll bring the video back up. I'm trying to figure out how to do that right here. There we go. Awesome. Steve, thank you. That was a great message, and the statistics were, I don't know what the word is, shocking, surprising, alarming, whatever the word may be.
Unfortunately, it's true.
Yeah, that's probably the best word. I want to encourage those of you on to be thinking of your questions. Leslie and I wrote down several. I want to start with one and maybe give the rest of you that are on the meeting time to kind of think or formulate your question. And let me strongly encourage you to do that. Steve, as the first question, when we met several weeks ago and we were talking, you were sharing some of this content with us. We talked a lot at that point about other types of addictions, such as busyness and addicted to work, and some of the day-to-day things that maybe, I don't know, maybe not get defined as addiction, or maybe seem to be more acceptable because it's just life. And why would it be bad to work too much? Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, you know, you can be addicted to good things, right? And by the way, just because you do something a lot of times doesn't mean it's bad, right? The definition of addiction included that it had negative behavior to it, and also that it's compulsive and you find it hard to stop. So, but you can be addicted to a good thing. The first thing I'd say is, you know, have you counted the cost? And by that meaning, have you really counted the cost and taken the time to do it? You know, I told you I was a high functioning alcoholic, and I was, right? I was doing great at work. I think I was a pretty good husband and a pretty good dad. But in recovery, you learn about counting the cost. And so to say, you know, Steve, are you really the husband you're supposed to be? Are you as present for your wife and as available and as calm for her in the right mindset as you're supposed to be? Are you really? You know, am I really as present for my kids? You know, when they want to play and I choose, well, no, I'm in happy hour, you know. So when you really get underneath counting the cost, you know, financially, right? If you have a few drinks at meals and you do that several times a week and drink to go to your ball games and have beers after work, you're spending several $1,000s. And you go through all are you really as sharp at work? Are you on and on and on? So one is counting the cost. It's probably more of a problem than you think. The second thing you learn in recovery is to play the tape forward, which is what really hit me. In other words, where is this taking me, right? Addiction is a progressive disease. It's gonna get worse, you know, and I just flashed forward, you know, a decade or two, and I thought, is this what my life is gonna be about? So I do that. The other thing I'd say is, you know, is there a chance that you're just unaware or you're in denial? You know, statistics show that people who suffer from addiction actually tend to be more intelligent on the average than not, and they become very, very good at rationalizing their behavior. My rationalizations were awesome, right? Like, work hard, play hard, man. I deserve to have a drink. I deserve to relax. I'm not hurting anybody. It's after work. You know, I'm only having beer and wine. No big deal. Man, that sounds pretty good, doesn't it? No, that was rationalization, right? I might have been saying blah, 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 right? So the other thing I would say is, can you quit? You know, one way to tell whether you're addicted to something is, do you really care if you quit? If you can walk away from it and not look back, it's kind of ironic. It's probably okay to do it, you know, but, you know, I know I have a lot of people tell me, well, I do this, but I'm not addicted to it. And I say, well, have you ever tried to quit? And they say, well, yeah, I've tried to quit several times. Well, how'd that go? Well, not too good. You know, guess what?
Or there's no reason to. It's not really hurting me. There's no reason to. Okay, show me anyway. Do it anyway. And it's a good test.
So again, right? I'm not I'm not pharisaical about all this, and I'm not trying to ruin anybody's buzz on this, right? Most of my friends drink, by the way. I go to Presbyterian church, and that's kind of part of what they do, So if you have 2 or 3 drinks, and, or if you have a couple of beers, or if you do whatever you do, if it's not compulsive, and if it's not really causing harm to anyone, and if you can stop at any moment, and you're not being a stumbling block for other people, and you're being a good steward of the time and resources that you've been given, and you're not seeing it as an idol, etc., it's okay. Yeah. But I would just say most people are not self-aware enough. They need to be more self-aware.
Right. Steve, 3 people just hung up. I think it was the 3 Presbyterians on the line with us. I'm kidding. Leslie made some notes. You want to jump in?
Yeah, I wanted to add one thing. Todd was talking about the busyness that we had talked about, but I think I shared a little bit of my journey with you, Steve. Mine was people. That sounds funny, but codependency and just needing people in my life. And the question I had to ask myself is, would I be okay if God removed this person from my life? And when the answer to that is no, then I think we have to stop and take a heart check and say, wait a minute, has this person become too important to me? And I know that's the tricky one, because people are supposed to be in our lives and we have important people. It's kind of like an addiction to food. You still have to have food to live, and you need people in your life. But at any point, even people can be an idol. So that was something that that was life-changing for me to realize.
That shows up in terms of adult to adult. It shows up with women more than men. But guess what? In parents, men or women, I kind of have a hypothesis that all parents are codependent to some degree.
Yeah.
Right. And they tend to be wired either toward control or toward enabling. Right. I was wired toward control. Right. So when my son's out drinking or partying, I wanted to control him. I wanted to put boundaries on him, or teach him, or lecture him, or preach to him. My wife was wired toward enabling. Out of her love for him, she wanted to protect him and take care of him and cover up for him and get him out of jail. And, so we're codependent. Our sense of well-being mattered more based on how he had done in the last 24 hours. That's where our sense of well-being came from. That's a compulsion. That's what your son or daughter can be an idol to you. And it's actually the case for many, many, many parents,
Yeah. Okay. Also, Steve, you mentioned the concept of a high functioning alcoholic. Can you kind of tell us in a definition form what that would be? Because I know that a lot of people think that might be them. So how would you define that?
It just means when you do have a compulsive habit that's causing negative, consequences, and you can't stop it, but yet you're able to function. You're able to go to work and do work very well. So you're not, lying in a gutter. You're not in jail. And when I started Steps Ministries 3 years ago, I didn't use that term to describe me, because I was afraid that it sounded kind of prideful, like I was acting like I was kind of only partly an alcoholic, But I found that using that term opens a lot of doors, and it opens a lot of ears, because, again, I talk to a lot of business people, and there's a whole bunch of them to say, whoa, wait a minute. I thought if you're functioning, that meant you aren't one, but addiction is not a number, and the fact that you go into work the next day does not mean you're not one. If you're slamming 6 drinks at, the night before, and your sense of self depends on it, and you have negative consequences, and you can't stop. In other words, if it's in control of you rather than you in control of it, guess what? It's an addiction.
And Steve, I think that what you just said right there, back to the overworked and over busy and those kind of things. I mean, it sounds like that applies to that as well. You can be a highly functioning overworker, or you can be a highly functioning over busy, or however you would say that, right?
Yeah. In fact, second time I'm quoting her in 1 hour, but I said Brene Brown earlier, right? She says that busyness is the addiction of this century, right? That we use busyness and activity as our addiction of choice, right? Especially, I don't mean to be picking on men here, but I guess I am one, so I know our foibles more, right? We think if we're real busy doing activities, that means we don't have to get real deep and to deal with all the stuff that we don't want to deal with, right? So we can, we run from work to another project to maybe a service project, right? And we just keep ourselves so busy that we don't have to take the risk of being vulnerable. We don't have to take the risk of being self-aware, and we don't have to take the risk of facing our own issues.
Yeah.
Busyness is both a way to deal with addiction and an addiction in itself.
Yeah. We had Steve, we had a sort of a, I don't know, demonstration is not the right word, but at work a few weeks ago, we actually had folks in a meeting close their email, like close it. And there was the panic on people's faces. I can't close my email. I won't be able to hear the ding go off when I get an email. Close the email and put your cell phone in your bag. And the panic that it created on people's face just to separate from email and from their cell phone. There's actually that, I don't know what it's called, you probably do, but there's that sensation of not having that cell phone. Your body feels that sensation of not having that phone attached to you, which is unbelievably revealing as to the need and the addiction we have to that phone or to that email, and living our lives by those things.
I mean, this becomes a little dopamine generator for us,
Yeah.
right? And digital addiction is a real thing.
Yeah.
Right. I've written about it. I don't talk about it that much, but it's a very real thing. You can be addicted to this. And certainly if you watch a 17-year-old, you go take a phone away from a 17-year-old and watch their behavior. And it's crazy. But unfortunately these days it's with a lot of adults as well.
Right. And I think that goes back to what you said earlier too, about why is it such a big deal? Like, why is it a big deal to have my email open? And why is it such a big deal to check my phone? And what I would say to people, I'd love to know if you agree with this, is you're saying that's the most valuable thing you could be doing.
Yeah.
You can compare that to the other ways you could be spending your time. If you're a leader in the corporate world, if you manage people, if you lead teams of people, and you can't break away from cell phone or email, what does that tell your people about their value? It is not even close to the most valuable thing you have available to do. And yet we can't break away with it. I love how you said that. Test yourself. Can you break away from it?
A lot of people don't get these basic truths, right? A
Yeah.
lot of people brag about being multitaskers all the time. Well, we actually can't multitask. When you really get down to how our brain works, we can keep plates spinning. Well, we can only do one thing at a time. And it's exactly as you said, right? If you're talking to someone and they pick up their phone, they're telling you, right, that that's more important than you.
That's right.
They may tell you, well, that's not what I'm really saying. Yes, it is what you're saying. You just made a choice. Now, guess what? They may have been so compulsive about the choice that it wasn't conscious, but they did it. You know.
Yeah. I've got a couple of more questions, but I want to pause for a minute. I've offered for folks to jump in with questions that anybody else does someone on with us here. Feel free to turn your camera and your microphone on. If you've got a question, let me give you guys a moment to jump in if you have something. Anybody? All right, Steve, while they're thinking, I want to ask one other question here. You mentioned addiction is a thinking disease, and you talked about that little voice. I wrote that down as a significant note. Kind of touch back on that for a moment, if you could.
There's aspects of that. One is it's a thinking disease in multiple ways, right? It starts with our negative thought patterns, right? And then those start to get wired. And again, I threw out the term, I don't think I talked about it very much, called neuroplasticity, right? Neuroplasticity means the good news that you can rewire the neurons in your brain. It's happening all the time, right? Old dogs can learn new tricks. You are what you repeatedly do is a very real thing when you look at brain chemistry, right? So the good news is you can change a behavior. And if you do a positive behavior over and over again, you're rewiring your brain to do that. The bad news is, guess what? Neuroplasticity works against you, right? If you teach yourself over and over again that when I feel stressed, the way I solve that is by, smoking a cigarette. Guess what? You may be addicted to the nicotine. You're addicted to the behavior of smoking the cigarette. So it's a thinking disease in that way. But also, if you look at our brain as a computer, right? So I work for IBM, right? So it's kind of like our conscious brain is, our processor, right? That's all we're aware of. But then we have an unconscious brain, which actually has a lot more. So I'm not going to get all techie. That's like our cache memory, right? That's not, but guess what? Then we've got 1,000 times more of that, which is in our unconscious. Our brain is working 24/7 like a mainframe, and it's firing messages at us all the time, sometimes which are random and sometimes which come from bad places. So you're going to get voices coming into your brain, and you have to, on your own, you can either allow that voice to hang around, and by doing that, you're encouraging it, right? You're starting to build it into a thinking pattern, or you can notice it and catch it and say, I'm not going to encourage that. I'm going to discourage that. So, those voices become thinking patterns, which become wired into our brain, which become behaviors, which become habits, which become addictions.
Gotcha. Thank you for going back on that. Rob Compton, I saw you came on video. I want to take a moment and go back. If you had a question or a comment, feel free to jump in. All right. Anybody else out there with a comment or a question? Chastity's got a question.
Hey, can you hear me?
We can. Thanks
Okay.
for jumping in.
For some reason, it won't let me do my video. It keeps saying you can't start your video because the host has stopped it. So
No
maybe that's
problem.
why no one else is popping up.
Gotcha. We can hear you loud and clear. Sounds great.
Okay, good.
Here we go.
Is there a way that I can watch this recording again? Because I was trying to take notes, and I do help with a men's drug and alcohol where rehabilitation is what it is. It's a 10-month program. And the slide that you showed about the chains with the acronym of it, I didn't get all the notes of it. I would love to share that with them because most of them have either been in jail, and that's why they've come there just trying to get their lives back. But it's a 10-month program where they are going through, they can't have anything, nothing but Jesus. And so it's called the Blake House. I don't know if you've ever heard of it.
Actually, I haven't. I know a lot of them. Yeah.
Yeah, they don't allow the government or anything like that to be involved so that they can do their program because they really want them to depend on the Lord. But I took some pretty good notes just for myself. And I don't want to bring fear into my life, but my son, which is now that's 15, his cord was wrapped around his neck multiple times too. And so, you're saying he'd come in fighting for his life. I was just thinking about that. Is there any were there signs of you noticing him to start changing?
It wasn't the umbilical cord, but I just thought that was ironic.
Yeah, but things happen.
The interesting thing that we look back at, and this showed up later in life, but I used one incident, and they were literally either 2 and 4 years old or 3 and 5 years old. They were that young. And we had just moved to Orlando, and my wife and I were teaching a marriage class in our church. It's called Becoming One. And there was a verse in Song of Solomon that talked about 2 daughters. And it used the metaphor that one of them was a wall and one was a door. Now, in the verse, the context is a little bit about chastity, but most of the interpretations of the verse are that this concept applies otherwise, right? A wall is solid. You push on it, it doesn't move, right? So a wall is someone who's safe and secure in who they are. A door is influenceable, right? You push on it. And so a door is someone who may be more subject to peer pressure and things like that. So we went home from that, and let's say our boys were 3 and 5, and our older one was Carter, our younger one was Ryan. I said, Catherine, Carter and Ryan, wall and door. In a few seconds, she answered the same way that was in my head. Carter was a door, Ryan was a wall. If you met our older son, you would be very impressed by him. He was an extrovert. He was very popular. He was good looking. He was good with friends. But his sense of self came outside in, right? We now go back and look at videos when he's 5 or 6 years old playing Little League. When he's up at the bat, he's trying to look cool. His sense of self came from the outside in. Our younger son is an introvert. If you met him, you would see him as quiet, but he's not shy. He has a very good sense of self. He's wired from the inside out. He is who he is, and he's very comfortable with that. So I think about their sense of self. And by the way, a lot of teenagers get insecure. That's not what I'm saying. But inside, do they form that impression of themselves inside, or is it given to them by the world? And by the way, if it's outside in, this device just got twice as deadly, right? Because not only are they addicted to this, but guess what? It's given them a consistent stream of inaccurate information. It's showing them how good a time, how good a life all of their friends are having. Oh, which, by the way, which nobody posts reality on social media, if you're a teenager, right? So that's one thing. Obviously, faith is another, right? If you have a God that you think loves you and that is there to care for you, that really gets you through. So it's a sense of self, faith. And the other is, do you have things that you do that you feel competent or excited about? That triad of spiritual, emotional, and personal, right? Spiritual is, do you think that there's a God who's loved with you? Does life have meaning? Emotionally, where's your sense of self? Are you self-aware, and are you kind of okay in your own skin, even though you're a screw up, right? So that's a good thing about recovery, right? You can be a screw up, but you're still kind of okay with it. And then the third is kind of personal, right? Is, are you willing to take steps to get confident in areas? Because that gives you confidence and a sense of contribution, so that's kind of a longer answer than you thought, but
That's great.
If you say it's a boy, right?
Uh-huh.
The only other thing I'll say is, I'm not trying to scare you, but probably if not when you catch him experimenting with something, if you haven't yet, right? Because 75% of kids are going to try something, in that age. Looking back with my son, if I was going to change one thing, this would be one, is that in the early age where they're trying and experimenting, don't swing the spectrum toward control and boundaries too much. Try to talk to them and listen to them. Try to see if you can understand their world, right? What is the problem they're trying to solve? Are they trying to fit in? Are they anxious? Are they sad? Are they insecure? Slow down. Don't freak out. Even doing what I do, right? Them smoking a joint or having a drink's not the end of the world, right? You would see that maybe as an opportunity to allow them to connect with you, so if you catch them doing something, just give him a little grace and see if he'll talk to you about it, and ask him why he did it and what problem was he trying to solve, and if he tells you about something, I would suggest thinking that it's a no consequences kind of you give him a free pass. Because if he told you, that's a breakthrough. If you have a 15 or 16-year-old who's telling you something that they've done, I'd consider that a major victory.
Right. He's my youngest. My oldest is 25. I have 2 boys and 2 girls. So, but yeah, and we homeschooled them. So, the reason anyways, but I don't know. I was like, I'm going to ask if you saw it.
Yeah. The homeschooling's different, right? I mean, in school, kids can get any drug that they want within an hour in school. And that includes heroin, and they're just going to see it a lot more. And they're not actually going to take a statistical analysis, right? But they'll think everybody's doing it. They'll think everybody's doing it. So, homeschooling's a personal choice, but it has some advantages to it.
Yeah.
Hey, Steve, that's such good advice. And Chastity, thank you so much for jumping in on that. That's such a great question and jumping into the conversation. Thank you for that. Steve, I love the advice you gave about about being encouraging in the response, because if I'm learning from what you're saying, there's something that's causing that behavior, and the yelling and screaming and the over controlling addresses this, but not this. And what your advice is to the listen and connecting and understanding what's going on in their world gets to this. And that's so critical. I may have just cut someone off. Did someone else jump in with a question or a comment?
Yes, this is Andrea. Hi.
Hey,
Hey,
Andrea.
Andrea.
Hi. I just want to let you all know that I'm just really enjoying all of the information. I do want to share with me being a retired school teacher in the public school system that it's not always the peer pressure. I have taught for 36 years. So homeschooling it's good, but through all of the students that I've taught, I learned that there are three things, no matter what age you are, every human being needs. And that is number one, to love, to be loved, to love, and to belong. So if they go toward negative, peer pressure, they still have that sense of belonging. So you want to make sure or try to have them in a positive, area so they can belong to like the sports, a choir or church or something like that, instead of negative ways where they can belong. So I wanted to share that.
Well,
That's
that may be one of the most powerful forces on many, many teenagers is a desire to fit in and belong.
Yes.
And if they're on the fringe or they're, they're starting to play the class clown and they're not playing their, get as many good grades as they are. And all of a sudden they find a group of people that doesn't care about that. And maybe they smoke weed, maybe they take pills. They can find a very, very tight bond with those people. They actually become very good friends, and they find a sense of intimacy and belonging that that is extremely powerful.
Right.
And most human beings, but certainly teenagers, are desperate for a sense of connection or belonging.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Good stuff, Andrea. We've got, we're over time. Steve, thank you for staying with us, and thank you everyone for the great engaging conversation. Rob, I know you've kind of jumped in a couple of times. Feel free to, if you've got something to add, to come back on camera and let us know. Otherwise, we've got time for maybe one more comment. So there you go, Rob, we got you. You got anything?
But it's just interesting to think through, right? You're trying to think through the church, right, as a whole struggles with anything like this conversation in a way, right? Addiction's a strong thing, and sometimes I guess my heart is, how does restoration occur in the church, right? And I think it's such an important thing, because when we hear someone's an addict of this or that or whatever, I think sometimes it's just we don't know how to respond the right way. And it's not judgmental, but it's also a matter of just struggle. I mean, we just struggle to know how to respond. Yet that's the heart of the church, heart of who Christ was restoration. So I don't know if I have a question as much as I have just a.
Yeah, I'll make some commentary. And this is broad. I go to an incredible church, one that has compassion and vulnerability, and where the pastors are transparent and it's open to people with mental health issues or addiction. So I'm talking about the church at large on average. I think most churches are absolutely broken in how they handle this, right? They're not part of the solution, they're part of the problem. One of the places where people are more fake than any place is in church, right? They put on, everything has to be going okay, everything is going well. They hide from everybody else what's really going on. And right now, I'm 3 years into this ministry, and I'm doing some work to kind of rebrand our message. Todd and Leslie wanted to have kind of an addiction-oriented message, but what I'm doing is I'm altering it so that when I give a lot of presentations, I'm going to lead with something a little more aspirational, all that, because guess what? Churches don't want to talk about addiction. They don't want to talk about sex, and they don't want to talk about addiction. And a lot of companies don't want to talk about it either. Human resources know that the problem is there. They know it's incredibly costly. They don't want to turn over that rock. It's uncomfortable to them. They don't know what to do about it. So you would think that, a church would be a hospital for people who are hurting, right? But very often it's not, in many cases. And so there is a message there that says if we're going to be a dispenser of love and grace and unconditional love and restoration, shouldn't that church start with the people who are hurting the most, right? I mean, who did Jesus hang around, right?
Yeah.
And as far as I know, he probably hung around a lot of drug addicts and drinkers, and by the way, a lot of people who couldn't, and by the way, I'm a strong believer of the church in its entirety, in all manifestations. So I'm not bad mouthing the church. I'm just trying to be real, because a lot of churches need, they really need to do. But there's people, it'll break your heart, who go in and confess something to one of their pastors, and the pastor doesn't know that they were abused when they were 5. Their pastor doesn't know that addiction is a medical disease, and the pastor just says, well, you're sinning, you need to pray yourself out of it. Although, which is true, right? I mean, certainly addiction has a spiritual component. It also has a medical component, and most modern pastors understand that, right? There is only, so what the message I give is, there is only one supernatural way that you can heal the issues in your life. There's only one. And because there's only one God and there's only one way to do that. But God in his wisdom doesn't seem to choose, in my observation, to come down and zap people out of their problems too much. He will never allow a temptation that he doesn't give us the tools to deal with. But he normally wants us to put together kind of a holistic path, and he's there helping us. That's what restoration normally is. It's a path that takes a period of time with multiple components. And if churches would have more grace to deal with hurting people, I think it would help a lot.
Steve, that's well said, and that's a great segue to kind of closing out. So, Rob, thank you for that comment, and Steve, thank you for that response. This may sound like an infomercial when I say this. I don't mean it that way at all. I mean this genuinely. I'm going to go back to what I said about how God is working through Leslie. There's a reason why he spoke to her about those 3 buckets that we started with at the very beginning: ourselves, our God, and our relationship with others. And we believe our ministry is about doing that. And Steve, to kind of pick up on your point, a gentleman that we work with as part of our ministry said to us a few weeks ago, if the church did what it was supposed to do, we wouldn't need ministries like mine and yours, or ours and yours. But I'm thankful we're able to fill in those gaps. And I want to encourage those of you on this call tonight, if you've got a pen, you want to write this down, or you may already know our website, stepbystepministry.org, stepbystepministry.org. You can find those 3 buckets that we talked about. You can find our email address. I'm going to put a link to Steve's email address on there as well. Steve said earlier, if you guys would send him an email with some feedback, I will make sure all of you guys get that email so that you've got it if you weren't able to write it down. stepbystepministry.org, and you'll find all those resources there. So, Steve, words cannot tell you how much we appreciate you. Thank you for your partnership in ministry and for your time with us tonight.
My pleasure. It's all good. Life's good.
Let me close this in prayer, and we'll log off. Okay. Father, thank you for this time and how you guided it. Thank you for the words that were spoken. God, we ask your blessings on the message tonight. Ask you to pierce our hearts. God, use your truth that was spoken here tonight. Speak to us, challenge us. Let us meditate on your word, God, that Steve so eloquently shared with us. Let us walk away changed and different with your power and your grace to become more aware and more ready to change, God, what we need to become more like Jesus. We commit that tonight. We thank you for your word and for speaking to us tonight. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Yeah.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, y'all.
See y'all.
Thanks, Todd.
Thank you. Bye-bye.